Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you. All right, we are back with another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. We have Coach JD Gravina, head women's basketball coach at Western Illinois University. We are very excited. Coach, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Todd, Jon, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Coach, we like to start every episode with what we call the opening tip. It's kind of just our guests' opportunity to kind of talk about their journey, their program. We know you've been at Western for a little while, so if you just want to give our listeners just a little bit of your bio, how you got to where you are today, and then maybe a little bit about your program.
Yeah, well, I could probably take the whole hour talking about myself and my journey. So I'll try to give you the short version, but my journey is a little bit unique. I grew up loving sports, but not necessarily wanting to coach. But I think it was always in my blood. My dad was a high school girls basketball coach. So it's kind of one of those things where, I didn't really realize that I had that knack and that love and passion for coaching. But when I look back, I realized how I was developing it. Played a lot of sports, when I was a kid. In fact, I played basketball, tennis, and ran track at college. And so I wasn't very good at basketball, but I was a pretty good tennis player. Played number one for a couple of years at William Jewell College, but I really loved basketball. So that was kind of always interesting. And went to school, majored in math and computer science because I was going to become an insurance actuary. When you see the list of like top jobs in the world, like actuary is usually number one or top couple. And so I graduated. I got my job as an insurance actuary for a firm that made computer software for insurance companies. And all my friends just thought I was rich. I had this great job and did it for about 9 months. I liked the work, but I didn't like working every day in an office. After that 9 months, I was ready for my summer vacation, and realized I got, my 2 weeks off and thought, I don't think this environment's for me. I'm a little too social. I think I've got a little more passion than staring at an Excel spreadsheet all day and crunching numbers. So I quit, having no idea what I was going to do. Went back to grad school, decided on economics for what reason I'm still not sure of. I thought maybe I wanted to dabble in politics, which is hilarious because I hate politics now. And got a graduate assistant job as a tennis coach at UMKC. So I was a college assistant tennis coach. I had taught tennis lessons throughout high school and college. So that wasn't a stretch. Then in the second year of grad school, the head coach quit, and I actually became the head men's tennis coach at Division I UMKC. I think I was 22, 23 years old. So that was kind of an interesting getting thrown into the mix with college coaching. But my passion was always in basketball. So at the same time, the head women's basketball coach at William Jewell College offered me her second assistant job. Back then, it was an NAI school. I think it paid $1,000 for the year. And after the first week of coaching, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I had a little basketball journal. And I just remember writing in there, like, this is what I want to do. I want to coach college women's basketball. And from there was a little bit of a journey. Took a head high school job, which in hindsight was probably a pretty big risk because it's so hard to make that jump from high school to college. And applied for every small college coaching job in the nation for 2 years. And finally, McPherson College, it's crazy the way it worked out. They were looking for a women's basketball coach, but also someone to start their men's and women's tennis team. So that tennis experience is really what got me into college women's basketball coaching. Had a good second year there. It was a kind of a tough program. Got the job at Quincy University, which was a good program. Did well there, and then landed up the road here at Western, and thought maybe this was the next step in my journey, and probably then realized once I had kids and really became a part of this community that this is probably hopefully my last step in my college journey. So as far as the program I think we've built here, we've got a little bit of a reputation of, getting really good kids, playing a fast and motion style offense. But we've had a lot of loyalty. We're kind of trying to do things different in this whole transfer portal world. And hopefully that works out for us. But we've got a good thing going here, and it's been really fun at Western and in our community.
So you just talked about your journey, and it ties in perfectly to this next question here. So throughout those different stops, right? NAIAs, Division twos, Division ones, even tennis, right? Take us through how you kind of changed as a coach, right? And maybe things you improved on and learned. And then like some of the things you're like, you thought, oh yeah, this is a good idea, and you got rid of, or hey, I didn't think about this and added. And then I'll get to the second part of the question here in a second.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. When I was an assistant coach at William Joe, I've told this to Jill Kress, who was the head coach at the time. Like, I thought I had it all figured out. I mean, it's amazing as assistant coach. Like, if we just would do this, we just would do it this way, it for sure would be successful. And then I got that first head coaching job. So I did everything that I thought we needed to do, and it didn't work. And then, I mean, that is a hard reality check. People talk about moving over that seat. And I mean, I could list, 20 or 30 things of just what I thought would work. My development as a coach, I think has been I don't know. Sometimes I go back and think I might have been a better coach when I was younger, completely fearless, really aggressive as far as shots, all the things we're known for. But as you move up, you kind of get a touch more conservative with your coaching. I think you coach just a little bit more out of fear. And sometimes I have the goal to kind of go back to, especially my early years at Quincy when it was kind of, we're going, we don't care, we're gonna really play aggressively. So I hope I've done other things that have kind of helped me as a coach. I think a lot of my development as a coach has actually been personally, um, which I know isn't really the question, but how I've developed as a person, as a husband, as a father, and how that's affected my coaching. Um, and the relationships I have with the players, how I treat the players. I mean, when I was young, I had no problem, thinking about like having to cut a player or kick a player off the team. I don't know that I ever had to do that, but I would have no problem doing it. And now it's like I haven't had to do that at Western, but that's kind of one of my fears. I lose sleep over the 13th kid on our roster that works really hard. That's a great kid that doesn't get to play. So I think that kind of development of a whole person has affected my journey. Excuse me, my journey as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just talked about it, but maybe some advice. I mean, you talked about, I think it's interesting. You talked about getting your opportunity because you could also coach tennis, right? Um, and kind of getting that chance. I think a lot of coaches are like, hey, how do you apply and you apply and you do this and you try to get that opportunity. And sometimes for whatever reason, it doesn't work out for a number of factors. So maybe some advice you give the young coaches to kind of grow themselves, but also try to make it so they can get that opportunity, and stand out.
Yeah, it's so tough. I feel so bad. I mean, there's a ton of coaches at all different levels that are just phenomenal coaches. Like if you had to list the top 50 coaches, you probably wouldn't recognize most of their names because they're coaching at some D3 or NAI school or a high school, and just never got that opportunity. Maybe they didn't want it, but I hate to say it because it's cliche, but it really is all about those connections. And a part of it's luck. I mean, I can tell you when I was at McPherson College and I was applying at Quincy, which was way above what I should have got. I had no business getting the Quincy job after being at McPherson for 2 years. In fact, I remember the article in the Quincy Herald Whig said NAI coach from Kansas, tabbed to be next Quincy coach. It was a little bit of a shot at me, and luckily I was able to prove him wrong. But um, you know, when I when I um, when I talk about building those connections, I mean, a big part of it is luck. When I was at Quincy, the athletic director at Western, Tim Van Alstine, he was a racquetball player, really good racquetball player. And I was a racquetball player and he golfed a little bit. So he'd come down to a golf scramble. One time we happened to be on the same team. We were talking about racquetball. Then we got together 2 or 3 times to play racquetball. And next thing his job's open. And I was kind of the obvious choice, I think, anyway, being close, but like those sorts of lucky connections. I mean, at the end of the day, people are gonna, especially in this day and age, they're gonna hire people they trust. And they almost it has to be at least like 1 degree. I think some people think like, well, I know this, Bill Finley will make a call for me. And like that may be true if some big time coach is going to make a call for you, but you're already 1 degree off of knowing that person that's going to get hired, because Bill Finley himself probably isn't going to hire you. So, getting to know people that are at a more reasonable level of their career. So like if you're a high school coach and you're wanting to make that jump, getting to know NAI coaches, getting to know D3 coaches, D2 coaches, and then of course getting to know people that are either in administration or going to get into administration, as a lot of coaches do, because then you're only 1 degree. Like, hey, this person was the best way to get a college head coaching job is to be an assistant, and when the head coach moves on, you get that job. So being willing to kind of get to that level and not try to rub elbows with all the big dogs at the Final Four, I think is a good way to get in.
So something we talk to guests about is, the movement. We've had complete episodes working on your resume and moving up and moving around. But I think something very rare today, whether it's players or coaches, is somebody that stays somewhere for a long time. And you've been at Western for, I believe, around 15 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, something around there. I've lost track.
So I think something, interesting to talk about with you, or maybe what are the keys to sustaining the success? Because I'm in my 9th year of where I'm coaching as well. And I think sometimes people think about, getting somewhere and building it up. But I think I'm starting to learn, and maybe you are too, is sometimes the harder part is sustaining that success. There's so much movement, but, maybe talk about how a coach stays at a school for an extended period of time, sustains success, and kind of not only sets the standards, but maintains.
Yeah, boy, it's tough. And I never dreamt I would be here as long as I have. And again, when I got the job, it was pre-kids, and that definitely is a game changer. I think the first step in that is wanting to be somewhere for a long term. Everyone's, I think a lot of times are always kind of 1 foot out the door looking for that next step. And, on my journey, when I got the job, we were really bad. We built it and had a couple good years that were just off the charts good. Where we won the league and we beat Stanford, we beat Illinois, and I definitely had some opportunities, and that was pretty eye opening. And what I realized is I had these interviews, I had these opportunities in that year. I I deep down inside was not excited about it. I did not really want to get those jobs. And I looked around at maybe some of the coaches at that higher level and thought, you know what, I'm happier than that person. I'm happier than that person. And so at the end of the day, I think a big part of me staying has been it goes both ways of you have to be able to maintain and build that success, but also you have to want to stay when you do have some success and not just jump to the next job. And I think when you get that mentality of jumping, 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 then you get somewhere and maybe you have 3 or 4 bad years, and then you're in a real world of hurt. Whereas when you have that loyalty to a program, we had a really bad year a couple years ago. We won 11 games, and as a coach, I was a little bit nervous about my job. There was a little bit of, has he lost it? Is he getting comfortable? But I think the success that we had had for so long was more than enough to kind of carry me through kind of that bad year. So as far as sustaining, I mean, I think a lot of it comes to um, treating people well. So that's people in the community, that's people that work at the university, and that's players. Because if you do struggle and you treat your players well, and they're kind of pulling for you and they're kind of taking your back, that's going to help. And even more importantly, when it comes to recruiting, if you look at our roster, we'll have 5 or 6 players sometimes from the same AU team. That I've probably coached 12 Wisconsin Lakers, we've probably, in fact, this year we may start 3 kids from the Missouri Phenom. And what happens is when you treat your players really well, when they go back and talk, those are your best recruiters. When they go back and talk to their teammates, they are selling you. And I think that helps that success, because it does come down to recruiting and getting players and having that success. And then just recruiting good kids. I mean, nothing can get you out the door faster than having kids that are causing problems, especially in a smaller community, causing problems in the community, not being good role models. Our team had a 3.86 GPA this season, which is just absolutely off the charts. They're great in the community, and so all that stuff, it builds up that equity as a coach. And so then when something does go wrong, when you say something you shouldn't, when you have a bad season, then you've got that equity built up to kind of help get you through that until you have more success and have more equity. So hopefully we'll have a good year this year, and I could build up a little more equity and keep my job a little bit longer.
So I don't know if we've ever really talked about this, but I mean, it's perfect for you considering you're a multi-sport athlete, coach multiple sports. The balance of, especially in recruiting, like specialized athletes and multi-sports athletes. So, when you're out recruiting, are you looking for multi-sport athletes yourself? And then what can we do to encourage those multi-sports athletes to keep on going versus everyone just picking a sport when they're 8, 9 and just playing it, because like I know I played football, basketball, baseball in high school, right? I think looking back at it, it benefited me, it helped me, right? So where are you kind of at on that, and how can we kind of encourage that, especially at younger ages?
Yeah, and I mean, we could probably talk for the whole hour on youth sports and where that's gone, but no, I'm a big fan of multi-sport athletes. I mean, most of my best players have played several sports. In fact, I was looking at our recruiting class. Um, we've got a girl from Iowa that plays 4 sports. She went and threw shot at the state track meet and then had to leave and drive back for soccer practice. She's a soccer goalie. Um, Kennedy Herrig from Liberty, she is a track star. Just kid after kid. In fact, one of the best players I've ever coached, Emily Clemens, was a 4 sport athlete, and that's probably the reason we got her. Is she was not playing a lot of summer basketball. She wasn't playing all the viewing periods, so we could get a kid that was a little bit under the radar. She ended up being conference player of the year, um, and in the Summit League. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that it's really healthy and it's a good thing to do. Now, the harder question is, how do we encourage that? Because the problem is with us coaches, here's what we're terrible at. We'll get on social media and we'll talk about how important it is to be a multi-sport athlete. We will talk about how important it is to have a mental balance in your life. We'll talk about, recruiting loyalty and staying where you're at, not hopping with the transfer portal. But then our actions are completely different. We cut kids, we go find 4 kids in the portal. We're mad because a kid doesn't play in one of the live periods because they've got soccer, or because they choose to go to prom. I've had recruits who are like debating, and I'm always like, go to prom. It's going to be your only chance to do it. And I would say the same thing with the multi-sport athlete. In the end of the day, your talent level is going to carry you, especially now. I think maybe 10 years ago, it was a little easier to fall through the cracks, and maybe this coach didn't get to see you. But now with all the information we have, with all the streaming we have, with social media, we're just so connected that, like, if someone's talented, they're going to show up on some coaching radar. So I don't think you're missing out. Now, how do we sell that message to the kids, and probably more importantly to the parents and even the high school coaches? I think you've probably got some basketball coaches that are pushing their players not to play volleyball because that's interfering in the summer work they want to do. So that's probably a question for someone a little smarter than me, like you guys.
First of all, we're definitely not that smart. But anyways, moving forward. So Coach, I actually think this is interesting. So you have a bachelor's degree in computer science and math, and you kind of talked about why. But I also want to know, maybe, how do you implement those skills into coaching? There's so many numbers, so many analytics. Todd and I did a whole episode with one coach on just using analytics. But are there specific numbers you guys like to use? And how does technology maybe play a part in that? I just think with your background, we don't talk to too many coaches that have bachelors in computer science and math.
Yeah, there was a part of me a few years ago where I thought maybe I would just get on with a big program as our director of analytics, because there was a time where I was I was speaking at the Final Four on analytics. I was a little bit ahead of the game, I think, because of my background. And then now with all the computer software and just all the people that are going into the field, there's a lot more out there that are focusing on analytics. The interesting thing from my perspective is, even though I'm a math guy, I think we've gone too far, believe it or not. I think that analytics are hugely important. I think it's helped things, decisions in football, if you're going for 2 or going for it on 4th down. I think that's helped because I've always had that aggressive mentality. Like when I was at Putnam County High School, I was the 7th grade football coach, by the way, so we onside kicked every time, went for 2 every time. Well, never punted because you could punt it like 8 yards. So, but I think the analytics has helped push some things that way. I think there's some Basketball is a much more fluid sport though. So the analytics aren't always what they seem. I think a great example is fouling at the end of the game when you're up 3 points. That's a really interesting one, but there are so many variables to that. When you're even looking at intent, was a team trying to foul and didn't end up fouling, and the other team hit a 3-pointer because they kind of reached to foul. They didn't end up fouling, team got open three. That's not, you don't see that in analytics. That's not taken into effect in analytics unless they're, in the huddle knowing what their plan is. But I do use it a lot. One thing for me is like foul trouble. You'll watch my teams. I've had kids have 4 fouls in the second quarter before because I pretty much just keep playing them until they foul out. And I've just seen it too much where you rest it or you take a kid out for the whole first half because they have 2 fouls, so your team's struggling, they're out of rhythm, and then that kid comes back in and they play bad because they're out of rhythm. Um, and someone says, "Oh, we lost that game. So and so had 2 fouls, we're in foul trouble, it cost us the game." And my answer always is, "Well, you didn't have to take them out. There's no rule that says you have to." So I'd rather kind of risk that, and our players learn to play in a little bit of foul trouble. But that's a great example of where we use analytics, and some of the simple analytics are huge. Points per possession. A lot of the what I would call kind of the synergy analytics. Or like I use her hoop stats a lot on the women's side. That's a really good website. But you have things like offensive and defensive rebounding percentage, okay, which is of course much better than just looking at rebounds per game, even per possession. So some of those analytics are great. But on the flip side, now we've got so much software, and some of them are really good. I use Just Play a lot. They've got a good analytics package, and you can pull some things out of there. But I think some coaches don't have enough of the math knowledge, the stats knowledge, to know what also to ignore. I'll give a great example. Probably one of the best coaches, maybe the best coach in the history of women's basketball, Tara Vanderveer. We were playing at Stanford. They were ranked, I don't know, 15th in the nation, let's say. They had lost like 5 home games in 10 years and are playing lowly Western Illinois. We're there, we're staying at the hotel. I think we were playing on a Tuesday, and like on Thursday, they were playing Tennessee. So Tennessee's at our hotel. I mean, we had no business being there. We did have a pretty good team. So we go in, and our little point guard, Emily Clems, I mentioned earlier, fairly early in the year, she was shooting like, I don't know, 18% from three, right? Way too small of sample size. Girl was a great shooter. Well, and Stanford's more athletic than us. If they just guard us hard, like we're going to really struggle. Well, Tara is used to playing against equal competition. She's looking for any little angle here, advantage here. So she completely lays off Emily Clemens. And of course, Emily hits like 4 or 5 threes, gets our momentum going. We end up beating them, and probably the biggest upset maybe in the history of women's basketball, or at least that year. And that, I think that's a good example of people of kind of overlooking the fact that like analytics don't tell you everything. And that's coming from one of the best coaches ever. So I think being able to look at it and pull some things out of it without getting lost in it. Same thing with scouting report. I mean, if you're out there on defense and you're thinking, when this post player catches on the left block, she turns to her right shoulder 70% of the time, but her points per possession is 0.9 here, like forget about it. Like when you're on defense, I'm thinking like, if I can get my player to remember, like this girl goes left, okay, I've done a good job. Or she's a shooter, like sometimes I think you have to simplify it. Like in our scouting reports, we've kind of gotten away from this, but I think we might go back. We would label someone as a Ray or Rondo, if they're, and then we added like a LeBron that kind of did everything. But, just kind of simplify it because you can overthink as a player. So I think those analytics, you got to kind of be, especially in basketball when it's such a fluid sport. Analytics are phenomenal in baseball, right? Because there's a stoppage every time. I mean, those things are accurate. There's not a lot of extra variables. Football analytics are off the charts. In basketball, there's so many variables that I think it's a little bit tougher to isolate everything, and we can lean on them a little too much. Sorry for my rant.
Oh, that was awesome. I think we could probably go a lot deeper in it, but let's go to what we call halftime adjustments, kind of the halfway point here. And before we start talking about your offense, let's lay the groundwork before we get into more specifics of how, like right now in the summer, how you're acclimating maybe your new players, your people that came in, I guess refreshing your returners or adding, what you want to build on for your team this year in the summer to kind of lay that groundwork for right when you get, you take your break and then you come back and really get ready for the season.
Yeah, well, the one interesting thing about our summer is we just do 4 weeks in the summer, and actually, I'm noticing a lot of coaches are dialing back a little bit what they do in the summer. Which again, I think we were a little ahead of it. Us coaches, it's like we're allowed to do 8 weeks, we got to do 8 weeks. We're allowed to do 4 hours a day, we got to do 4 hours a day. And I've always had a little bit more of a balance mentality, and I think that came from coaching at some lower levels and working my way up. But so our players aren't here yet this summer. They come in the beginning of July. And you're only talking 4 hours a week on court. So it's not a lot. So that's what's tough. I think the best thing about summer is getting acclimated to the weight room, especially for our young players. I mean, that's a adjustment that I don't think anyone's really prepared for. So that's kind of nice. But to get to your question, what we try to do in the summer is a lot of like smaller level games, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, putting people in positions that they'll be in our motion offense and letting them play and trying to get more reps in. Here's what I struggle with as a coach. And I was telling my team this. So let's say you're working on something like a high ball screen, roll and replace, just something simple. Okay. Um, when you're doing that in the game, the kid coming off a ball screen is really working. They're going to get some shots up, right? But then you're doing it in practice and you get aggravated because that kid comes off a ball screen and shoots a pull-up jumper. And it's like, that's not really what we're working on right now. Well, I think the summer is a great time to work on that. Like we're working on this high ball screen. That kid may attack and try to score, 3 out of 5 possessions. And we just kind of got to keep it running. So, I think like giving kids opportunities to make plays like they'll make in a game in those smaller games is something we work on a ton of. And then reading screens. So that's the thing I'm guessing when we get to our offense that we'll talk about a lot, but that's kind of the core of our offense is just really breaking down the different screens we set and how we read screens. And that's probably the hardest adjustment, that so many kids like when they go to set a screen, they just go what we call head hunting. They just go to screen the person. That's not how we screen. When they come off the screen, they're just replacing that person. Like most colleges, that's not how we come off a screen. And so breaking those habits are hard and it's frustrating because it seems really simple. The person goes under the screen, you're going to fade it out. They chase, you're going to curl. I mean, it seems like the simplest thing. And we'll exaggerate. We'll have a coach will just jump way under that screen and run right into the screen. And they still just get in a hurry and want to run off that screen real quickly. So in the summer, we really started introducing that concept and just rep it and break it down and teach it and work through that frustration a little bit. And then we play a ton. Our offense is mostly about, playing. And so we play just a lot of 5-on-5. Sometimes we'll change the game, change the shot clock, change how we score, some things like that to try to get something out of it. But, I'm a big believer in you get better at basketball by playing.
So as we go into the second half of the show, as you kind of alluded to, we're going to kind of talk about your offense. And I could go through a lot of numbers. We'll go through a little bit of numbers as we go, but we really want to kind of just break it down. So we'll kind of go through maybe some foundational things, some personnel things, some skill development things, just kind of as we go. But let's kind of start with when I did some research, you kind of inherited a team that averaged about 57 points a game when you came in. But maybe what were some of the things you did to kind of establish what you did on offense? Maybe just like the base, and maybe just some key concepts as you first came in.
Yeah, well, I think, and you're probably going to get annoyed with this because a lot of my offense is about what offense, right? Like we play basketball. And so sometimes I don't have as many specifics as what people like, but that's the first thing I did when I got in to establish it is just completely take the leash off everybody. And, take away really all the structure. Like when I teach offense, it's never about here's what you do, here's where you go, here's our alignment. People ask what alignment do you use? We don't have an alignment. So a lot of it was just about removing all the constraints that go into a normal offense, and letting basketball players be basketball players. And, a key tenet, I think, of our offense is if you think of most offenses at any given time, there's one or two people that are given a scoring opportunity, right? Obviously, the person with the ball, then there's usually some action that's setting up someone coming off a screen or cutting or whatever. And then maybe the person setting the screen is a threat too. In our offense, all five people are always a threat to score. They're constantly looking for a scoring opportunity to present a scoring opportunity to someone else. That could even just include spacing out to give someone a driving lane. So I really think that's a huge tenet. And it was a little bit of a leap of faith for me because it was kind of one of those things where everything I tried, and this is where my analytics came in because I did a lot during practice. Everything I tried, we were better offensively when we were working on our defense, right? Because when you're working on your defense, what do you tell the offense? Like, hey, just play or just do this because you work on your defense. You're kind of playing open gym style. And whenever we did that, our offense was always better points per possession wise than when we were working on our offense, we were working on our structure. And so after it took about, really after about a year and a half, where finally I said, forget it. Forget the concept of an offense. We're going to teach concepts. We're going to teach basketball plays. And it kind of worked for us. And so we had, I know we'll get to this, we kind of have developed it a little bit more, but a lot of it, that first thing I did was just taking the leash off everyone. And then, like I talked about, getting really aggressive, transition, again, another area where analytics is big. Everyone looks at their transition numbers on Synergy and they look at their points per possession because usually that's the most important number. The problem is that's really misleading. What you really need to look at is your transition percentage because almost every team has a higher points per possession transition than they do in the half court. So your goal in transition is usually to get a shot because that shot is almost always better than a shot you're going to get in your half court versus to always get the most efficient shot. So a team who has let's say they have a 1.2 points per possession transition, but they're only transitioning 10 or 11% of the possessions. Yeah, that number's high because it's factoring in the wide open fast break layups they get. And that's putting that number a little bit higher. Whereas for us, our points per possession might be, 1.1 in transition, but our transition percentage is like 25, 30% sometimes. So that's a much higher, that helps our efficiency a lot more when you look at the overall game. So really making teams aggressive in transition. I mean, we push on makes, misses, live ball turnovers. We push on dead balls. One thing, my old assistant, Seth Minner, would just wear you out saying dead ball push, dead ball push. But if you watch our teams, especially back when he was there, I mean, someone travels or the ball goes out of bounds. What's the defense do? They take a couple walking steps, they turn their head or they put their head down, they get back. By the time we have the ball, we're up the court in 2 seconds. Now they're out, they're already behind. So we get a lot of baskets out of dead ball pushes. So I think kind of unleashing kids in the half court and in transition was the very first thing that I did and maybe the most important.
So let's bump that to the personnel, right? Because obviously that's different than most teams play. High school, you see a lot of like teams are just running sets after set after set, right? Not maybe, I mean, and some coaches, it's trending more the other way to concepts and things like that. But so how do you kind of find that balance of, okay, this player has a really good skill set, they can shoot, they can drive, they can finish, whatever it may be. But also projecting that into your system. And then, when you're looking at it, you see a recruit, maybe they're not a perfect skill set or whatever, but yeah, they're good at this. So how do you kind of tweak that to fit them into what you're doing as well?
Yeah, I really think it's one of the best things about our offense, and probably the reason I've had a little longevity here, like you mentioned, because there's almost no bad fit for our offense. Because our offense is completely dependent. Like your role as a player, that's why I tell recruits, your role as a player is dependent on what you're capable of doing. So we could play with a back to the basket power five that just wants to. I mean, Ashley Luke was a great example, conference player of the year that we had here, who was a block player. I mean, she would step out to 12 feet or so, did all her scoring around the basket, was strong. We can play with more of a stretch four type of post. We can play with a little quick point guard. We can play with a tall, slower point guard that can see over things. We do like shooters. I would say that the reason that's so important is because, especially at Western, I think, we're a rural town. It's a little sometimes harder to draw a good player. So when you have a good player, you can't turn away a good player because they're not a right fit for your offense. You have to take that good player and make it work. And that's what's been the beauty of our offense is, that works out. And we have a little reputation for taking shooters. You do have to be a good shooter in our offense. It really can kill spacing. We can put one kid out there maybe that can score around the basket, that can rebound, that can't really step out. But we need to have 4, if not 5 shooters on the court at the same time. So I think that like that well-roundedness of our offense, it really helps recruiting and helps our personnel. I think that another thing that is the one thing we can't have is someone who plays with their head down. It's funny when I get we get a million recruiting emails, and a lot of times there's like a picture on it. And if that kid's head's down, it's like a natural like instinct for me to be like, I'm out on that kid. So that would be the one thing that I would say we turn a kid away for is if they really play with their head down. It makes it difficult in our offense because you have to have really good awareness. So like basketball awareness is one thing that you have to have, but other than that, we can make anything work to our system, which I think really helps us.
It was funny as you were talking about, you may get mad with my answer. I am a conceptual coach, and I sent Todd, this is my kind of coach right here. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. We want to get into now. Okay, so you kind of have your recruits, you have your personnel, you have your base concepts. Now let's really dig in a little bit deeper and break it down. So what are you guys consistently doing in skill development that kind of matches your concepts, especially to teach maybe decision making, awareness, those kinds of things? Maybe what percentage of practice are you specifically doing shooting? And kind of almost like how much of the practice time on an average practice are you spending on offense versus defense to kind of teach those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was going through, the rundown that you guys sent me, and this was the question I had a hardest time with of like what we do for skill development. But I think as we've been talking, it's kind of came to me a couple different things to answer your question. The number one thing is reading screens. So that is I don't think most people really think of that as like a skill development, but that's 100% a skill development. And we set a lot of different screens. We set way more, we call them fade screens because they're not flare screens because we run them really high. We don't fade them out laterally. We run them up, more at a 45-degree angle. But we set a lot of fade screens. Obviously, we set some down screens, back screens. We set what we call flip screens, which is where you go to down screen for someone, and then the person coming in flips it and ends up screening for the screener into a fade screen. And so just working on, first of all, making that decision before you move. Like that seems like a simple concept. That's so hard for young players, especially because here they are D1, they're trying to prove themselves. So everything's fast, so they pass and they just want to start moving. And so then it usually just becomes a crappy screen away or a crappy cut because they just want to move, as opposed to figuring out what you're going to do, seeing if someone's setting a fade screen for you, and kind of slowing down. That's a skill, being able to slow down and let things come a little bit. So we work a lot on that. Like one thing we do is you have to communicate your movement before you do it, because if you communicate it, you know what you're doing. You're not just running like a chicken with their head cut off, right? So doing simple stuff like that helps develop them into good decision makers. And then we do a lot of like I talked about, those shorter games are decision-making games. You're coming off a ball screen, it almost, I will admit, we do things where it's structured, especially first, where there's a coach on defense, they're helping every time, you're kicking out. I don't really love that stuff, but we kind of do it. That's one way we get a lot of shooting in, or just kind of making the habit of seeing that defender come and making that decision. But I don't love that stuff because it's just so ungame like, and it doesn't really help as much with that decision making. So we do it a lot more in a liver setting. Is liver a word? I don't think it is, but we do it a lot more like that.
It
And
is
it's
now.
okay. I appreciate it. It is uglier, right? Like when you're doing a drill, even, and we'll do a lot of read the defense drills where like the coach will help or stay and you make that decision. But our coaches are still making kind of the obvious read. And so it's a prettier drill. We'll go through a whole 2 or 3 minute drill, and they'll make the right decision every time. And we do that with reading screens. So the coach will go under, or the coach will chase, or the coach will yell switch, and they'll have to make the right read. We'll go through a 3 minute drill and they'll make the right read every time. Of course, in game, it's not like that. The defender's dancing, they're faking one way, they're late, they're early. And so we do that, I think, to kind of build the concept and the idea. But then where I think it really helps is when we start to break it down to more of a live play situation, and like a 2-on-2, 3-on-3 with them on defense. So as far as shooting, we do a lot of shooting. I mean, we probably do, I'd say 20% of our practice is shooting, which I think is a lot. A lot of shooting is into our drill, so it's hard to pull that out. But we kind of mix in. We usually kind of go drill and then some sort of live type of session, and then back to a drill, and then back to something live. And I say about 50-50 offense, defense. The good thing with our offense is when we learn so much on offense when we're working on defense. That's one thing that I've definitely learned going through the process is when we're working our 4-on-4 shell, it's amazing. Sometimes, at first, when we do a live 4-on-4 shell, our players just have to stay in their spots. And they can move a little bit, but they just can attack and kick and fill the spot back out. No screening, no cutting off the ball, whatever. And we're usually pretty damn good on offense, And I tell the players, like, look at this. What do we have? We have good spacing here. We have good timing because we're not just moving around all the time. If you're moving, you're probably not looking for the ball, right? I mean, if you're coming off the screen, you're looking for it. But if you're just kind of moving to move, you're not really a threat. And so, I think a lot of times when we're working on defense, we get some of our best offensive work. And now I can't say the flip side. When we're working on offense, we don't get very good defensive work going. So, but yeah, I'd say we're about 50-50 working on building up our defensive concepts. And on the defense, we try to be kind of opposite. We have a lot of rules, a lot of black and whites. I think that we can say like, we're going to guard this screen this way if this player is a Ray or a Rondo or a green or red or however we call it.
So let's get into the analytics a little bit more and assessing like the effectiveness of your offense, right? When you're looking at it. But the first thing I'm gonna build on a conversation we had last week because it came to my mind, right? You guys are playing a little bit more free, right? So shot selection, right? And we talked with our guests last time about like grading shots and because that, you could see just in my mind, okay, we're playing more free. Well, a lot of times that means, hey, I can get up this shot, right? So let's start there with the shot selection and how you're kind of I guess molding them and teaching them like, hey, yeah, that's an okay shot, but we can get a better shot within that decision making, right? Because it's all decision making and reads and things like that.
Man, you hit the key question on the head. I'm glad you asked that. I don't know. I wish you had some advice for me. I'd say shot selection is probably the toughest thing as a coach, especially in our style. And because it's so important, right? It may be the most important thing of our offense is our shot selection. But at the same time, with that freedom, I think the worst thing you can do is question whether you're shooting the ball or not. So those are pretty much opposites. Like we have to get good shots, but I don't want you questioning whether you should shoot or not. So it almost has to develop naturally. And I'd say this is one of those things when I was younger, I mean, I almost never questioned a shot. You know what I mean? I wanted them to be aggressive and not play with fear. As I've gotten older, I think part of it is having a bigger coaching staff, because the traditional person man, I've got my assistant now, Dan Chaplin, just phenomenal coach, all-time winning coach at William Woods, has been a couple different places, been a head coach. And a little bit opposite of me, he would admit, more conservative, bad shots just drive him crazy, turnovers drive him crazy, and so I think that's a good balance. But it is really, really tough. And I think that the way that we've kind of handled it is at the end of the day, they're going to look at their shooting percentage or their efficiency shooting percentage or their true shooting percentage. And if it's bad and they're losing minutes, that's going to kind of naturally get their shot selection a little bit in order. I have more in the last couple years talked more about shot selection, I'm super nice about it. Like I never yell at a kid like about a bad shot. I never pull a kid about a bad shot. But if you're consistently taking bad shots, you're going to play less. There's no question. So it's kind of the way of fooling that mind to think like I don't have to question my shot, but yet building your instincts that if you're taking good shots, you're gonna play more because every kid wants to play. So man, is it tough. I expect bad shots just like I expect turnovers. I tell the media after that, after games, I tell our players that like our best games, we don't have as 6, 7 turnovers. We have 15 or 16 because we're playing more aggressively. Same thing with bad shots. You know, our I think one of the best offensive players I've ever coached. She was a freshman last year that averaged 19 points a game. I told her before the season, you're going to take more bad shots than anyone else on our team, and you're going to lead us in turnovers. And she did both. So maybe that was a mistake, self-fulfilling prophecy. But, you know, because she's aggressive and because she can score, she has to have that aggressive mindset. And people think shooting is a decision, but it's really not. And this goes back to youth sports. One of my biggest criticisms, I've heard other coaches talk about it, is when a coach or a player or a parent is yelling, shoot it, right? Because if you catch and then you have to decide to shoot, you've already missed that shot. Like you guys know as coaches, you can tell if a shot's probably going to go in before they shoot it, right? Or at least have it be a good shot. And so, you know, I think that's really tough. Is shooting really isn't a decision you make. It's more of an overall mentality. So I've had kids where I've had to try to work on the overall mentality of, you know, if you want to play more, your strength really isn't in that 3-point shooting or, you know, pull up 15-footer off the dribble. And can you start thinking of yourself as someone that's looking for a different type of shot, not can you get in a game and decide whether you're going to take that shot or not? So terrible answer. I know, boy, that's a tough one. I wish
Yeah.
I could solve that
No,
issue.
it is. It is. Oh, you're preaching to me now because I'm walking around practice. You know, guys, where's the basket? It's over here. So catch the score. Catch the score. Catch the score. Like let it, let it go. So let's talk about general and just more general offense, right? Not individual. Like maybe you come in at halftime and or when your offense is really humming and going well. Like what are kind of the numbers you're looking at that kind of predict that, hey, we're having pretty good success offensively here.
Yeah, I mean points per possession is for sure the number one thing we look at. But again, there's a lot of things that go into that. If you're creating some live ball turnovers on defense, right? Your points per possession is going to be higher. That doesn't mean you're doing great things in your half court offense. You're just getting some, I mean, you'd be surprised with a small sample size. You get 2 steal layups in a half, like that changes your points per possession where you think you're doing a great job offensively. So I do think that's one of those areas where sometimes the numbers, you know, as a coach, it's more of an art than a science. People are they're moving towards the science. And when I first started coaching, it was all an art, you know, and I thought I moved a little bit towards the science, and now people have gone way over here. And now I feel like I'm kind of an artist, which is funny with my background. So a lot of it is more like eye test. I think the big thing we're looking at is shooting percentage. And again, you can look at that and you can parse out the fact that like, oh, well, we're shooting this, but hey, we got 3 fast break layups. You take those out, we would be shooting this. It's a simple enough number. You can do that in your head. A big thing is getting to the free throw line. You know, that shows how aggressive we're being. It shows, you know, that we're playing in good space, that we're making good decisions if we're getting the free throw line. So that's a big thing I look at. And then of course, you know, at the end of the day, it's about winning. So if we're up in the game, I feel like we're doing some good things. But our halftime adjustments are usually pretty because we don't have, you know, some coach are going there and saying, okay, instead of setting this screen in this part of the offense, we're changing, we're setting this, you know, ours are more like look for this more, look for that more, you know, hey, we're running too many dribble outs. Sometimes we get in this mentality where we just dribble out and dribble out and dribble out. And we call them dribble outs, not handoffs. The handoffs like is when you take it and you just replace each other. But our dribble outs, we're stopping, kind of pitching it back, reading off that. So we'll take it and go back the other way. We'll shoot it off that. So it's an effective play, but for some reason the kids can fall in love with that dribble out. So sometimes we're, you know, running too many of those. So they're usually more general things that we're looking to improve on.
I think he is the first coach when we ask him key stats to assess that's just like, you know what we assess to do it well? We're winning. If we're winning,
Yeah.
it's a good assessment. All right. So as we move into our last two segments, the first one we call 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to discuss whatever you'd like. It can be about yourself, your family, your program, something you want our listeners to know about. Pretty much any topic. You could turn the tables and ask Todd and I a question. Sometimes guests do that as well. And I promise there's no referee in your timeout telling you your 30 seconds is up.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I actually blew it once this year, and I was discussing something with our coaching staff, and I went in the huddle, and the horn went off because the timeout was over because I didn't realize it was a shorter timeout. That's like a nightmare for a coach. So, I loved this 30-second timeout. I thought about 30 different things I'd like to talk about, from ranting on this or that, but with cancel culture the way it is, my wife said, "Hey, don't say anything stupid," because she knows me pretty well. And sometimes I say stupid stuff. So, I thought about, asking you guys some advice for Disney World because we're headed there on Wednesday and I'm not exactly looking forward to it. So I don't know if either of you have done that, but just keep me in your thoughts and prayers there. But, I think the big topic, well, one of the big topics is all this NIL transfer portal, crap that all of us coaches, again, we talk bad about, but then we're the ones that are partially responsible for it. And I just don't understand, when a kid comes on a visit to Western, I tell them, like, we don't roll out the red carpet for you. I mean, we'll do a few things, to try to make it a good feeling. We'll clean up the locker room, but you saw the tweet where Texas put out the Lamborghinis for the kids walking in. And actually the thing that just kills me is the pictures on recruiting visits in women's basketball. Okay. Like, you've got how many girls wearing like a queen? Oh no, it's not a tiara. What is it? Like a queen crown in their
Whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
yeah. You've got them sitting in like a queen chair. You've got the head coach like acting like they're the most awesome person in the world in these props. And my thing is, like, then we complain when these kids get here and they don't quite fit into the team concept. But we're telling them that they're a queen or they're a princess coming in or that they're the most important person. And I'm careful with that in recruiting because the truth of the matter is we can have a queen, we can have one. You know what I mean? Like, if we bring in a kid and they want to be the show, then we can have one of those players. And sometimes that's good. I mean, I would say we have one this year, not from a personality perspective. She's the sweetest, very humble kid, but as a basketball player, like, she wants to be the leading scorer. She needs to be the leading scorer. She will be our leading scorer. The other players want to be the leading scorer. That works. You bring in 6 kids like that and you've got the queen hat on all of them and you're taking a picture like they're the most important thing. And I think this goes into NIL, is that when you're paying kids pretty good amounts of money, you're sending that message of, how important they are. And I hope those coaches are telling, we don't have to worry about it because we don't have any money, but I hope those coaches are telling them, like, the other players are getting this, or some players are getting more than you. And you've got to build a team. So I think what's been good for us is we attract the type of player that isn't looking for that. And so, yeah, we take pictures, we put them in a uniform and that's it. Take a picture with me. I got my arm around them. That's it. I'm not acting like they're, more important than they are. We are looking for players to come in and fit in that team concept. So I think that's frustrating for me, is I guess I'm getting to that old man coach, which I used to feel like I was a real young up and comer, but that's kind of like, if we as coaches want to push, we want to go back to, players playing for the right reasons, playing for their teammates, having a great team culture, then we have to recruit that way. So that's something we're trying to do. We're trying to be different. We may talk again in 4 years and I'll be fired because, we didn't do as much in the portal and we tried to keep our players around. We didn't put the queen crown on them. Or we may talk in a couple years and, we've won the league because we've gotten our players to come back and built it that way. So let's hope it's the latter for my sake. And so I can afford to go to Disney again.
There you go. There you go. All right. So let's go into quick hitters, just kind of rapid fire random questions. First one, college course you learned the most from in like all your schooling. What did you learn the most from?
I got to go with two here. My freshman year, I had an economics 101 class. It was real basic, but it was just basically about doing how most people make decisions in their own self-interest. And that had a big impact on me on how to motivate. And then also like a sports psychology class for my master's degree at Emporia State. I think, we've talked about this basketball. We haven't said one thing about the mental sport, the psychological. I'm not even talking about mental health. I'm talking about psychological part of basketball, and that's probably maybe even more than 50% of it. So I thought that was really helpful.
All right. So Todd and I have both coached D3. So I think an interesting question always is when you were coaching, or even as an athlete in NAIA, you got a good travel story.
I think the biggest one is a general, although I do. I mean, I've had buses not show up. I've had vans have flat tires, and I've had all sorts of, parents have to bring kids home from game. But I think that when I think of general, my NAI travel life, it's those bagged lunches you get from the cafeteria with the slimy meat. That's all I could think about is just the slimy meat sandwiches and how, we'd get them because they were cheap, but no one would really eat them. So I don't know why we did it. But that was my number one thing from the NAI travel days, just those gross bag slimy sandwiches.
Or you get like a peanut butter and jelly in the sandwich and it's all like mushy by the time you actually get to eat it. Yeah.
That's right.
Trust me, I had plenty of D3 baseball travel days where here's your lunch.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right. Best place to eat around you. Best place to eat. Where are you going to eat?
Hey, don't sleep on Macomb. We got a few places. So got a couple of the chain places. We like to go to B-Dubs and McAllister's, but we have a place um down our square called Chubby's that's really good. They've got a lobster ravioli that's
Ooh, there we go.
I just want to eat at a place called Chubby's.
that's right.
Okay. So,
That's really good. It's called Chicks. So Chicks and Chubby's on the square.
Quincy, Illinois, for those of our listeners that don't know, is a basketball, we'll say addicted community, whether it's high school or college. They love their basketball down there. So maybe just a little bit of what that experience is like in that, maybe not necessarily coaching at Quincy, but just in that community.
Yeah, and I don't know how it got like that, but you're 100% right. There's two pretty big media um, markets there, KHQA and WGM, and they kind of push some of that. And then the high school basketball is just crazy. I mean, you go to a QHS game and you've got the Blue Devil. I mean, it's got flames coming out and they dance around, they turn off the lights. I mean, it's the real deal. It'll get your emotions going a little bit. They produce some really good players on the men's side and on the women's side. And so it's just really fun. I mean, when I was there, I had a radio show. I got sponsors. I probably made 10 grand, which for a lowly D2 coach, I was probably the worst paid D2 coach in the nation at that point. Like that was a lot of money. I had a car sponsorship, which a lot of D2 schools at that time didn't have. And we would get 1,500, 1,800 at a game when we were good. It's just a basketball community, and that's so cool. And I think, and in Macomb, we're kind of trying to build off that a little bit and become more of a basketball community. And especially on the women's side, I think that we've been able to grow that.
All right. Your favorite offensive coach of all time.
I thought that's a tough one. I'd like to come up with some really old school person that I think's a great coach, but just not quite the historian of basketball. I grew up watching my dad coach, so many games. So I maybe didn't watch as much on TV, but um, she's a current coach. But I think Jenny Baranchik that was at Drake and now is at Oklahoma I just love watching them play. And really, Allison Pullman has kept that going at Drake. Jenny's kind of had to change a little bit, I think, at the Power Five level at Oklahoma, but still fun to watch. But what I call that Drake system, I love watching. They move the ball a little bit faster than what we're able to do, but they're able to make really good decisions in doing that. And I think they have to recruit a little bit more specifically, especially with their post players. But man, I love watching them play.
All right, so I kind of tweaked the last one, but so who's your favorite tennis player of all time?
I'm gonna have to go with I will go old school on this one. I got to go John McEnroe. I hate that they now have the automated line judge challenge system because they were just nothing better than watching Johnny Mac just go off on a call and just have a complete meltdown. And I like the style play. It didn't seem like he was super talented, but he was very aggressive, serving volleying. And so I like Mac.
Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's awesome episode because I think it really hit home of like, you have a style and you have a way you want to do it, and that's kind of, how you do it and you don't waver. I think that's maybe lost a little bit today because people are trying to see so much information and change things and add things. Definitely going to get back and watch some more film and see what you guys do and pick your brain here down the road. But we can't thank you enough for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on. Let me know what you see. I'm always liking to get an outsider opinion on what we're doing. So, and again, shoot me some tips on Disney. I need them.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.